Dum-dee.
Hey, Anri, what are you doing?
Trying to get this night light to work.
Oh. Did you try Blaze level 1?
You know I'm a freeze mage.
Well here, let me try. Blaze level 1.
Ah. Teo, you set my robes on fire.
Poopsie doodle.
Imagine a world without Shining Force. I know, it's a terrible, horrid, wretched world. Once upon a time, this is the world that we lived in. But one day, a group of Sega employees decided that Shining Force should exist, so they created it. But unfortunately, instead of an SRPG, they made a dungeon crawler. Wait a minute, that's not Shining Force, that's Shining in the Darkness. Before there was Golden Sun, there was Shining Force, and before Shining Force, there was Shining in the Darkness. Shining in the Darkness was a hardcore dungeon crawler and an early RPG for the Sega Genesis. This game had a lot of DNA and ideas that we'd go on to find in Shining Force a mere year later. But Shining in the Darkness was and is its own thing. It's a game that I played a lot as a kid but never got to finish. I always stated that, yeah, it's pretty good, but it's no Shining Force, it's fine, a decent if unremarkable console dungeon crawler. Today, I finished this game. My thoughts are now, holy shit, this game is actually a top tier dungeon crawler and I think that every single one of you should play it. I'm Richard and this is RPG Fortress, and this is Shining in the Darkness. Grab your flashlight and let's get in the labyrinth. Shining in the Darkness was developed by Climax Entertainment and published by Sega for the Sega Mega Drive in early 1991. The game reached English-speaking territories before the end of 1991. Shining in the Darkness would go on to be the first title in the, of course, Shining series. In fact, the game actually appears before Sonic Software Planning was actually created. Climax Entertainment was basically a kind of sister dev to Sonic Software Planning at first. The dev team who would go on to become Sonic worked along Shining in the Darkness and the OG Shining Force. Some members of Climax would also work with Sonic, and some members of Sonic would also work with Climax. Artist Yoshitaka Tamaki can clearly be seen as the artist for Shining in the Darkness and Shining Force for Sonic, and Landstalker/Lady Stalker for Climax. Composer Masahiko Yoshimura would do the soundtracks likewise for Shining in the Darkness, Shining Force, and Landstalker. Sega had the team who would later become Sonic team up with Climax, as both teams were pretty small. Plus, Sega had no budget for a big RPG, so they essentially slammed both teams together for the first two Shining games. While the Sonic members didn't have a lot of or any RPG experience, Climax founder Ken Naito had worked previously as part of Enix on Dragon Quest III and IV. Former Enix employee Hiroyuki Takahashi would also join Climax before being moved on to Sonic Software Planning. With some Dragon Quest experience handily tucked under their belts, the dual-headed beast of Climax/Sonic would begin work together on Shining in the Darkness. With art by Yoshitaka Tamaki and music by Masahiko Yoshimura, the 1-2 punch of Shining in the Darkness and Shining Force would be a heady combo. While both games play very differently, there is just so much that is aesthetically similar between the two that I just can't separate them. They really do feel like games in the same universe. With few staff members and even less money, I think they really knocked it out of the park for the first game. Shining in the Darkness is an absolute thundercrack of an entrance, and Sega was actually right on the ball releasing English versions in North America, the UK, and Europe, all in quick succession in the same year no less. Well done, Sega. Have a gold star. I know I badmouth you a lot, but it's because I love you, you dopey The story of Shining in the Darkness is a familiar one. You are the aptly named hero, the son of Mordred, a knight in the kingdom of Thornwood. Your father and the Princess Jessa have both disappeared, so King Drake tasks you to look for them. It's a good thing there's a giant, multi-leveled labyrinth next door. It's the perfect place to start your journey. The king gives you a bit of money to do some shopping in town. Admittedly, he doesn't give you a lot of money, so you won't be buying a lot. After your short-lived shopping spree, you return to Castle Thornwood to encounter the evil sorcerer Darksoul, who confirms that he is responsible for the kidnappings as he wants to take over the kingdom. Like I said, it's all very familiar stuff. You then enter the ginormous dungeon and start exploring. Shortly after beginning your quest, you realize that you need to go through 4 trials, but relax, it's just additional floors in the dungeon, but you need to find a key or an orb or whatever. Before you get much further, you get to return to town and you find your friends. In town, you'll find the halfling healer Milo and the elven mage Pyra. Your friends easily join your group and the party is complete. That's right, it only takes about 30 minutes of gameplay to pick up the remaining members of your party. I'll talk about it a bit more in the gameplay section, but the trio of Hero, Milo, and Pyra is incredible. This small team really fills every niche. The party then spends the next 30-ish hours and 9 floors smashing goblins in the face, looting treasure, gaining levels, and occasionally having a bit of dialogue. It's 1991, so it's not Shakespeare, but it's just interesting enough to keep you invested. The real star of the game is obviously the dungeon crawling, but the minimal and familiar tale of a dark lord to be vanquished and a pretty girl to be rescued is just the frosting on the dungeon crawling sundae that is shining in the darkness. Sorry, I have to have at least one absolutely tragic metaphor per video, it's the rules. The story is very cliche and bare bones, and so are the characters. Hero is a silent protag, so you won't get really much out of him at all. Milo and Pyra are a bit more fun, but also don't say a lot after they join you. Milo is somehow self-serious and a bit of a doofus at the same time, whereas Pyra is headstrong and quick to lay down insults. They're fun caricatures with fun designs, but you don't get a lot more out of them after they join you, unfortunately. The other NPCs are likewise lacking. But that's okay, like I said, the dungeon is the real main star of the game. Everyone else is just set dressing. There's just enough life there for everyone to live up to their tropes. Darksoul chews the scenery like any evil sorcerer would, the Knight Mortrid is suitably tragic, Zern is the resident Gandalf. What really brings these characters to life is the character designs of the late Yoshitaka Tamaki. The man really knew how to create some intriguing fantasy characters. Okay, let's talk about the gameplay, but I want to start with a tangent. I have played this game a million times over the years, but never gotten much farther than the second area, the Trial of Strength. Finishing the game for this video was my first time completing the game. I know, for such a big Shining fan, it really took me quite some time to do this, didn't it? Anyway, previous to finishing up this little game this past weekend, my thoughts on Shining in the Darkness were, yeah, it's a pretty fun little first-person dungeon crawler, but console dungeon crawlers can never live up to PC dungeon crawl. I was wrong. Shining in the Darkness is not only a competent dungeon crawler that's only available on console, but it is a great example of the genre. I look at console ports of Eye of the Beholder and Dungeon Master and think, yeah, they're not bad, but there's always something just a little bit wrong with them. Dungeon Master is slow, Eye of the Beholder's controls are a little bit f***ed up. Shining in the Darkness feels like a dungeon crawler, but plays like a console RPG. It somehow solved all of the issues with console dungeon crawlers, and no one actually bothered to tell me. I was not expecting my opinion to change so drastically by pushing past the areas I normally stopped at. And I didn't stop because I stopped having fun or anything like that. I always just got distracted by something else. But since really putting everything into this channel over the past year, I have really started pushing myself into finishing games that I start, and I'm very glad I finished Shining in the Darkness finally. The progression of Shining in the Darkness is just so good. You're always wanting to play just a little bit longer, to see if you can find a way past a locked door, to see the next level, to see the next spell, to see the next weapon or the next piece of armor that you find. I was not expecting a Diablo-style loot lust to take over me, but finding new gear in this game is awesome. There is a level of excitement while traversing the dungeon that just carried me through wanting more. Rewinding a bit, Shining in the Darkness is a first-person dungeon crawler. You traverse a 9-floor labyrinth, fighting random battles and leveling up your trio of characters. The dungeon is loaded down with twists and turns, locked doors, some traps, and lots of loot to find. When not rocking through the dungeon, you can visit the town to rest, buy gear, and talk to NPCs. When not in dungeon or town, you can visit the castle to talk to the NPCs there. These 3 locations are handily accessible from a very rudimentary world map. The castle is basically just there for gathering info and progressing the plot. It's basically just the king and his crew standing around shooting the shit. You know, hanging out and flapping their gums while a 14-year-old boy and his friends wander a monster-filled dungeon looking for the princess in the kingdom's most powerful knight. Sure, I believe it. Town is pretty fun. Instead of walking around, you kind of swing the camera around in a 360-degree motion. As you swing the camera around, you pass by all of the different shops and places of interest. You got the weapon shop where you can get your weapons. Hello, Gilius Thunderhead from Golden Axe. Fancy meeting you here. There's the inn where you can talk to a host of colorful characters. Once again, Yoshitaka Tamaki's character designs are amazing. You can also rest here to regain your HP and MP. You can visit the armor shop to buy armor for all of your characters. Armor flavor comes in the form of body armor, shields, helmets, and gauntlets. All pretty straightforward stuff. Next to the armor, you'll find the alchemist, where you can purchase all of the different healing items you could ever need. Next to the alchemist, you'll find the shrine, which is where you'll be able to find the priest who can save your game, cure poison, resurrect your dead teammates, you know, just like in Shining Force 1. Now, eventually, a traveling merchant will appear in town. This guy has the ability to turn mithril and dark blocks into very strong gear. I wasn't expecting to see that in this game since it is the OG of the Shining games. I thought it was first introduced in Shining Force 2, but no, it was in Shining in the Darkness and just wasn't in SF1. Wild stuff. Now, just like in Shining Force 3, Shining the Holy Ark, and the Golden Sun games, whenever you go into and then leave a shop, there is a small percentage that the shopkeeper will try to sell you something unique, usually a powerful weapon or super strong healing item. Of course, you'll be spending most of your time in the dungeon, and yeah, I think it's a hell of a good time. There are battles, some light traps, light puzzle solving, and lots of treasure to find. The more I played this game, the more I wanted to play. Everything is just so surprisingly honed, and I still can't believe that this is the first game in the series. Traversal is that classic first-person dungeon crawling perspective. Up to move forward, back to move back, left and right to move the camera so you're facing that direction. You're a sword-slinging, magic-shooting tank. One thing that is missing is a map. Well, kind of. There's no map, but Pyra has a spell called View, which shows you a chunk of the map that you're currently standing in. It's not as good as a full map, but it's surprisingly helpful. And it only costs 1 MP, which is great. Shining in the Darkness has some very light trap mechanics. Trapped floors that drop you to the floor below can be a bit of a pain, but as long as you're mapping as you go, or have a completed map going straight from the internet, you'll be fine. You will eventually get a magic rope that'll allow you to climb up through floor traps, and there are even a few treasures that can only be found this way. Sneaky. Speaking of treasures, you are going to be finding lots of chests littered throughout this place, and in these chests you are going to be finding all manner of items, weapons, and money. Some incredibly strong weapons can only be found this way. Now, when equipping new gear, the game is old, so weapon descriptions are very obtuse and vague, unless you cast Milo's View spell on the item, which will give you a breakdown of what it does and who can use it. It's basically the Baldur's Gate Identify spell. It's very, very useful. And cool, and forward-thinking. What can hamper travel is your inventory space. Each character has their own stash of 8 item slots, giving you a mere 24 slots once you recruit Milo and Pyra. These slots fill up fast due to the rampant amount of items you will be finding in the dungeon. Unfortunately, your character's equipment also takes up these same spaces. So if you have a weapon, armor, shield, helmet, and gauntlets equipped on all 3 of your characters, that's 5 slots each. That's 15 of your 24 slots. And keep in mind, you'll also be carrying keys and other magical baubles to advance the story. So you can pretty much kiss your inventory space goodbye. Thankfully, you have the egress spell to bring you back to town, where you can sell off useless equipment before diving back in. But you don't get a fast travel item till excruciatingly late into the game. So if you do egress back to town, you are going to be slowly crawling your way back to where you abandoned the cave. This will eat up a load of time, but it's a dungeon crawler, so I guess you expected something like this would happen in the first place. Combat is good fun, but not particularly deep. You can attack, cast spells, use items, and run. That's about it. Hero doesn't even learn any spells, so his combat options are even thinner than Pyra and Milo. But meat and potatoes combat is better than trying something different and failing. I'd rather something plain and simple that works than something flashy that's broken. And Shining in the Darkness combat is very plain and simple. Most of the combat flavor comes from Milo's and Pyra's spells. They both have loads of spells to cast to spice up battle. Attack spells, healing spells, status spells, just loads of options. Like Shining Force, spells have between 1 and 4 levels and can affect different amounts of enemies. Pyra gains Blaze, Freeze, and Bolt 1 through 4, which is a bit excessive. Milo will be casting Heal a lot, and while the game doesn't have an aura spell to heal the whole party, Heal 4 does actually heal everyone, so take that gong, you big silly weirdo. While battles are random, some battles have an interesting flair to the enemy entering combat. You'll actually see the enemies enter combat sometimes. The giant crabs will peek around corners before scuttling out, armed skeletons will dig up from the floor of the dungeon, and those weird guys will drop from the ceiling. It's very cool stuff. I only remember seeing something similar to this in Shining the Holy Ark, this game's spiritual successor from half a decade later. I also have to give a special shout out to the soundtrack. Masahiko Yoshimura's songs for Shining in the Darkness sit right beside those of the original Shining Force. They share similar bombastic and melodic qualities. The town theme is boisterous and inviting, the castle theme invokes images of knights on horseback, and the labyrinth themes are brooding, terrifying, and malevolent. Yoshimura's soundtrack, along with Takamiki's art, really set up Shining in the Darkness and Shining Force as related games. The sound and images that these two bring in these two titles do a hell of a lot to tie them together. The legacy of Shining in the Darkness is a weird one. It launched the Shining series, but most of the games to follow were the Shining Force games, which play a lot differently than this one. The fact that a dungeon crawler spearheaded series most well known for its strategy RPGs is pretty bizarre, but Shining is bizarre as a whole. There was no direct sequel or remake, but as mentioned, Shining the Holy Ark is a spiritual successor. That game was also a first-person dungeon crawler and contained a lot of similar ideas and mechanics to Shining in the Darkness. I really need to finish that one day as well. I think it'll be sometime this year. Story-wise, all of the Shining games are connected. It's weird and vaguely Legend of Zelda-ish that this game is actually one of the later titles in the series. You see, Dark Sol in this game isn't the same Dark Sol from Shining Force. Dark Sol in this game is Dark Sol and Michaela's son Mephisto from the end of Final Conflict. Go localization issues. Whoops. But I mean, it was the early 90s, so this kind of thing happened all the time. Pyra would later appear and be playable once again many years later in Time Stalkers for the Dreamcast. This was a weird game, and I could not get into it back in the day when I was a kid. It has a lot of roguelike elements to it that I just couldn't wrap my brain around as an idiot kid. I definitely need to try it again now because I now love roguelikes. But yeah, Pyra, here she is. I love her. You can play this game on a million platforms, as it's almost always included in all of these mega huge Sega Genesis / Mega Drive compilations. You can get it for like $1 on Steam, and it's well worth $1. You'll get 30 hours or more of content out of it, and even if you only play it for a couple of hours, it's still worth $1. Just buy it. Shining in the Darkness is fantastic. It really surprised me with how addictive the gameplay loop really was once I finally sat down to get serious with it. It went from an okay game I never got around to finishing to an incredible experience that I will 100% play again. Old games can sometimes be hard to go back to, but Climax and crew really fucking knocked it out of the park with this game. They took one of the most hardcore RPG genres and made it into an accessible console game. This game starts off just easy enough to get you in the door, and then it slowly ramps up. It's an incredible difficulty curve, and they got it on the first try. The Shining series is best known for its super accessible Shining Force games, entry-level SRPGs that are some of the best. Tactics games are another subgenre of RPG notable for being super hardcore, and yet Climax/Sonic created some solid and user-friendly titles. They did this for dungeon crawlers and SRPGs. That is amazing. Now, if only they could have done the same thing with traditional JRPGs and Beyond the Beyond. Shining in the Darkness brings together immersive dungeon crawling, loot lust, streamlined combat, and quirky characters into a truly unique title. One that's almost lost to time, but not quite. It will always be outshined by the Shining Force games, but Shining in the Darkness is a good start to the series and stands alone as a wonderful console dungeon crawler. Something that you can't say very often. And that is it. Goblins smacked, cats hugged, arms of light equipped. Thank you all for watching my little video. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed playing this game. Have you ever played Shining in the Darkness? And what did you think about it? Most importantly, did you actually beat it? I know a shocking amount of people who haven't, myself included until recently. It's that time of the video where I ask you to do exactly two things. Yes, just two things. Please like the video, and please share the video. The channel has exploded in the last year, but let's be honest, old school RPGs don't have a huge fan base these days. But the fans it does have are very passionate. If you like the video, the YouTube algorithm will share it with folks of similar tastes. And if you manually share it, more eyes of these hardcore fans will get onto it. It's simple as that. Anyway, that's it for this week. I will see you in 2 weeks' time where we talk about a more recent tactics game, or one might say, Tactica game. For RPG Fortress, my name is Richard. We'll see you next time, and don't forget, tug a cat. Goodbye for now.